All right, well, here it is. I'm on stage, and I wasn't able to think of an ending in time, but maybe one will come to me as I'm telling this story. Um, so actually, unlike both of my predecessors, music's my category. I could tell 1,000,000 stories about music. I come from a long line of musicians on both sides of my family, but this is the one I'm going to tell. When my kids were young, they were destined to be musicians, and some of the kids in their preschool had already selected instruments. I remember being a little jealous of one mother who was continually saying, "Oh, my daughter just begged and begged and begged for a viola." And, she was 5 years old, so I was waiting for that moment when my kids would beg me for an instrument. So my oldest son, Adrian, didn't beg for a long time, and I decided, okay, when he's 8 years old, if he hasn't begged, I'm gonna step in and take matters into my own hands. So that's exactly what happened. He never begged, and he turned 8 years old, and I said, "Here's a trumpet, kiddo." So he took that trumpet, and he went to a school near here that didn't really have a band program or anything. So he did pretty well. He had this lovely teacher, a guy, Scott, really cool young teacher at the local music store, and they got along great, and Adrian was doing pretty well. But then his teacher moved away to Palm Springs, and so I was a little bit devastated. Now what do we do? The teacher's gone. So at the time, I was married to a man who wrote music for film and TV, so I had a lot of access to the best of the best. So that's exactly what I did. I called the absolute best trumpet player in all of Los Angeles. And I asked him if he would take my child on as a student. And he said he would love to, actually. But he was busy, traveled a lot, and he wasn't all that reliable as a teacher. He said, but there's someone that maybe you should consider. He's a little bit older, but he's been a trumpet player all his life, and his name is Yuan Racy. So I thought, well, why not? He came highly recommended. Well, Yuan turned out to be an incredible character. He was quite old. I was a little worried about that, but Adrian gets along really great with quite old people, so it really wasn't a problem. Yuan had been a top call trumpet player from his early days at MGM Studios. And in those days, you signed up with a studio and then you played on all those movies. And this guy played on them all, and he was the big trumpet cheese on all of these great movies. He played the famous solo in Chinatown. He played for Frank Sinatra and Doris Day and all kinds of long lists on my phone. But anyway, you get the picture. He did it all, and he was the number one guy. He'd had polio as a child, so he achieved all of this from a wheelchair. And by the time Adrian met him, he was half blind and probably half deaf as well. But I would drive to his house and leave Adrian there, and I would park outside and wait for the hour for the lesson to be up, and Adrian would come out and say he had a great time, and they were really getting along well. After a few lessons, Adrian mentioned, he said, there's just one little thing. He called me Richard, but I corrected him, so it's okay. When the next week we went, and again, Yuan called him Richard, and Adrian tried to correct him again, and then I didn't really think of it much for a few weeks, but I did ask him one time, how's that going with the Richard thing? He's like, well, I pretty much gave up correcting him. He just calls me Richard now. So it didn't really dawn on me what this could lead to, but Adrian got quite good at the trumpet. And Yuan had played in a lot of jazz bands, big band, and Adrian was really interested in doing that stuff. So Yuan really loved Adrian, and he said, I'm going to recommend you to play in some of these bands. And Adrian was very excited, but then he realized he's going to introduce me as Richard. Now I'm going to have to pretend to be Richard to a whole bunch more people. What if I become a famous trumpet player and everyone will know me as Richard? So, that was a problem. I think we even talked about him legally changing his name to Richard. One time, we went to, Adrian invited me to this local jazz club, which isn't around anymore, called Charlie O's. And that was Yuan's spot. Yuan had a table, like this table right here. That was his table. Whenever he came in, he sat there, and everybody treated him like the jazz royalty he was. And so he was there that night, and I went over to him, and I said, Yuan, because I'd always sat outside the house. I'd only met him a couple of times, and I went up to him and I said, Mr. Racy, or Yuan, I don't remember, I'm Adrian's mom. It's great to see you. And he just looked at me with a blank stare. And then I went, oh, yeah, I'm Richard's mom. And so we never really came up with a solution, but by now it was Adrian's, he had graduated from high school, and he went off to Columbia University, I'm so proud, with a trumpet under one arm and an accordion under the other. That's another story. So let's just do this music topic for a while. And that first year, I had to call Adrian and give him the sad news that Yuan had passed away. So that was quite sad. But I think that if you asked Adrian, would you really change your name to Richard to have this experience with Yuan? Hell yes would be the answer. That's my story.